It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always alive as well on the free Odyssey app. Ian Eagle joins us at the top of the hour, talking Kings, Warriors, talking about the Commanders sale as well. Also talking about the Nets-Sixers series. So the two games tonight, some NFL. But right now, our pleasure to welcome in a very, very busy man. It is Eben Novy-Williams of Sportico. You guys had more news. Appreciate the heads up on that, by the way.
Of course.
We appreciate that. Nice little back channel we've got so we can plan things. So we told the audience the general nature of the news, that the deal has been submitted to the league. What more can you tell us? What can you flesh out about that report?
I think the big headline here is that this is an incremental step forward for this sale. And if this was any other transaction, Craig, I think you and I probably would not be talking about this. It really is a step that is fairly perfunctory. But in this specific sale, for all the reasons that Commanders fans are all too familiar with, this is a big step because it does indicate that Dan is still planning to go forward with this $6 billion sale to the Josh Harris group. So the NFL will look at this, make sure that there's nothing in this deal that is really untoward, that is surprising, that it violates league rules. This is not the process that vets Josh and his LPs to make sure that they're good to join the club. That comes a little bit later.
Okay.
But this is the first preliminary look at pricing, financing, who's involved, etc. After which the NFL says, you guys are good to go. And then the next step from after that is essentially putting names on paper. And then once this deal is signed, then I think Commanders fans can really breathe a sigh of relief. But we're getting closer and closer by the day.
Yeah, LPs, limited partners, for those that are wondering what that meant. So one step closer to this being signed, and that was the thing that kind of caught my eye from Scott's reporting, your colleague at Sportico, is that, you know, if they like this deal, if the NFL approves it, it goes back for signatures. And at that point, like, yes, there is still more to be done in terms of finalization, vetting, all that kind of stuff. But it's closer to being signed and kind of closing the door on all of this other silliness that is happening around this deal. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Because that's the other thing. This feels like, oh, wow, they could have some signatures in place soon. Maybe Minneapolis is definitely in play for that finalization.
I think Minneapolis is definitely in play. I don't know if this is a step that's going to take the NFL a day or if it's going to take the NFL a few days, but for a lot of reasons, the league wants this sale to happen, right? And not only do they have that motivation, but Josh is a very established, well-known sports investor who's already a minority owner of an NFL team with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the league is very familiar with him, and the league wants to get this deal done. So I think for those two reasons, my guess is this is not going to be a very long process from the NFL, either on this go around, or if we get to the point where it's time to vet Josh and his group, I don't think that's going to be a very complex process either. I think that both of those things are going to lack surprises.
What Eben Novy-Williams, Sportico, is our guest here. What, if anything, like from the technicalities of the deal, could the NFL send back? Like, what are the things that are on the table, I guess, for them to review? Is my question.
I think the easiest way to describe it is to make sure that this deal doesn't violate league rules in any way, right? So a good example is private equity, right? All these other leagues are allowing private equity funds to buy up stakes in teams. The NFL doesn't. So, and I can't imagine this would be true, but if Sixth Street suddenly was 20% of this group, the NFL would say, wait a second, I'm not sure if we agree with that.
Right.
Pricing is another one, right? The NFL does care about how much its teams sell for. $6 billion, maybe a bit lower than I think some NFL owners thought Dan was going to get, or maybe lower than Dan probably would have gotten if this team had been run a little differently over the past decade or two. But I don't think the $6 billion price is at a point, is not so low that anyone's going to say we don't want this deal to happen. So there's things like that. It's just making sure that as lawyers go through the contract, there's no glaring red flags. There's no publicly traded companies involved, things like that. And financing, right? The league also wants to make sure that that the people who are buying the team have enough money, right? And how much debt is the group taking on? The league is very strict about that. There's a certain amount, I believe it's $1 billion that a new owner can have. So just making sure that the rest is in cash, who has it. There's rules around the control owner. In this case, it's going to be Josh, needs to hold a certain amount of equity himself, right? So making sure all those little bars are hit Those are all rules that Josh and his group, I assure you, are well aware of. So again, I don't think that this is, I would be shocked if there was any surprises here. And again, in a lot of sales, if this was the Ottawa Senators, I don't think we'd even be talking about an agreement in principle being sent to the NHL for the final checklist. It just is especially notable because even after a deal got reached last week, Craig, which you and I talked about, there were still people talking to us about, you just never know with Dan, right? This seems like it's done, but more so than any other owner, this guy could back out at any moment.
Yeah. If it was the Senators, then we could actually talk about Steve Apostopoulos. Instead, his name could just keep coming up in this sale for no freaking reason. So the other piece that is kind of floating out there that seems like a big potential hurdle, depending on who you talk to, is the indemnification piece. Obviously, Washington Post has continued to report that. They're the Washington Post, so I do not doubt them, but it seems like they have been on that, obviously, more than others, which to me says, someone that Mark Maskey or Nikki or Liz is talking to that is an NFL owner and is someone who is in a position to be worried, is very worried. And the other people reporting on this are not necessarily talking to that same person, whoever that may be. That is me recklessly speculating, reading the tea leaves. But is the indemnification, but regardless, I would say, like, who's responsible when the team gets sued and that kind of stuff, like, that does have to be worked out. So is that part of what's potentially under review in this deal, or is that kind of the next phase?
It very well might be. To be totally honest, to your point about who's talking to who, I have not had many conversations with people about the indemnification situation. And I've kind of always thought that part of that was going to be a decision that gets made when the NFL suddenly has the specter of Dan leaving on the table, right? That there's a little bit of that I think gets hard to answer until the deal is as close to signed as we are right now. So I assume we're going to find, and if it's Sportico, great. If it's the Washington Post, also great. I think we're going to have some news, I think, fairly soon about what that situation is like for Dan and what he's leaving around with the NFL in terms of the legal qualifications. The conversations I have had in the past with NFL owners, it was a non-starter for them. But again, that's a situation that I think it's easy to say it's a non-starter, 8 months before a deal gets done. And then when you're staring at this being the final hurdle between having a new owner of the Commanders and maybe ridding yourself of Dan Snyder, I do wonder if the non-starter becomes a starter of some sort for some owners. So to be totally honest, I don't have an answer on that. I have not heard much about where that process stands, but that it would not shock me if that's part of what the NFL is thinking about right now.
The non-starter becomes a finisher. Just save that line. I don't need my byline on the story. Everyone who's watching, listening right now will know. But when that's in your story, when that happens, when the non-starter became a finisher, that was me.
There you go, Craig. Yeah.
Excellent. Eben Novy-Williams, everybody, Sportico. Read it, sportico.com. Also, I know you guys just recorded a pod, so there'll be more out. Business of Sports podcast, I have that right?
It's the Sporticast.
The Sporticast, okay. There's too many podcasts out there. I've got like 3 on my own. There's way too many podcasts.
I know, but we have the only good ones, you and I.
That's now we're talking. Eben Novy-Williams, everybody. Ian Eagle is next.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.